today. My name is Mary, this is Happily Ever Esch, and today I want to chat about all of the books I read in October and the few measly books that I read in November. So happy Vlogmas day 3. I think this is going up on day 3. We're still chugging right along in Vlogmas. I am enjoying a cozy cup of Earl Grey. I enjoy mine with a little bit of honey and a little bit of milk. This is the Tea Pigs brand. Usually I'm a Twinings Earl Grey girl, but the Tea Pigs is pretty delicious, and that's good because I bought 50 tea bags from Amazon, so I'm glad that I like it. There's nothing like warm tea in the wintertime. I always get so excited to break out all of my tea in the winter and kind of go away from like the iced coffee and the iced chai that I usually drink in the afternoon, but a warm cup of tea is just about perfect. Okay, we'll sit that there. Okay, so let's chat about the books I read in October and November. October was a pretty good reading month. November was a terrible reading month. I had such grand plans to read lots of nonfiction. I was in such a mood to get to nonfiction, but just it wasn't in the cards for me. There was lots of health issues and a long quarantine alone with my toddler that it just didn't happen. And that's okay. So let's just hop on into it and chat about all the books that I read. So the first book that I finished in October, which seems like years ago, but that was an audiobook that I listened to, and it was Echo by Pam Munoz Ryan. This is a much beloved middle grade story, and I can absolutely see why. It is such a magical tale that really has kind of an old fairy tale feel to it. It's a very ambitious middle grade book, and it kind of feels old and new all at the same time. The story opens up and begins as kind of this whimsical fairy tale where this boy gets lost in the woods and comes across these three magical little girls, and it kind of propels us into the rest of the story. We follow 3 different characters' perspectives and how all of their lives intertwine around this magical harmonica. All 3 of the perspectives are totally unique, but they're all set in World War II, and so we're kind of connected through the storyline of how World War II would have affected these different individuals. But we follow a kid's in Germany, we follow a couple kids in America, in the East, and then also we follow a young girl in, I think it's the California area, whose brother is fighting in the war. So we follow very different and unique voices, but again, they're all connected through the power of music and the love of this harmonica. This story really is about the power of music and how it can connect humans, and how music really is this universal language that kind of connects us all. The audiobook was wonderfully produced. There's harmonica music throughout, and it was so much fun to hear the actual harmonica playing. All of the story arcs in this are really compelling in their own right. Each of them kind of leaves you on a little bit of a cliffhanger, but the next story is so able to pull you in, and then it wraps up beautifully at the end, kind of in a way only a middle grade can like really warm your heart and wrap together. It's equal parts rooted in reality and real human emotion and kind of what it would have been like to go through these moments leading up to World War II and in World War II, but there's also just the right amount of whimsy and magic. I really enjoyed this book. It was a really solid 4-star read for me. I think that this is just the perfect kind of book to give to someone who's maybe a little skeptical of middle grade because it's ambitious and sweeping. And if you like a little bit of whimsy and fantasy in your books, I would definitely recommend this one. Another audiobook I finished, I've been doing a lot of audiobook listening. It's how I've been getting some reading done, and I'm okay with that. And that is a religious nonfiction, and it's called Gentle and Lowly. I forgot I had a copy. Gentle and Lowly, The Heart of Christ for Sinners and Sufferers by Dane Ortland. I went ahead and purchased a copy because it was one that I knew I really want to reread and sink my teeth into and annotate. This book really is asking the central question, what is the heart of God? There's many attributes of God, but let's look at his heart. And the Bible said, from our hearts, everything else pours. And so kind of bringing that philosophy to God, like what is God's heart? And it pulls from theological Puritan giants to kind of base a lot of its arguments, but it's also very biblically based and uses the Bible to back up what the author is saying about God. The chapters are really short but impactful. There's so many beautiful nuggets of truth, and it just kind of talks about, like what the title says, that God has a gentle and lowly heart and what that means for people who are in Christ. and believers, and it's just such a beautiful book, and I highly recommend to Christians or just anyone who wants to know more about what the heart of God is. I couldn't recommend this one enough. It's full of truth, but also just told so lovingly and gently, and just feels so life-giving. I absolutely loved this nonfiction. I gave it a really high 4-star rating, but I think upon a reread, a physical reread where I can annotate it and really, read in a different way with my eyes and a pen in my hand, I really think that this could move its way up. I really enjoyed this one a lot. Next was my book of the month club pick. It's a short little literary thriller, and that's Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. This book I have majorly conflicted feelings about. There was a lot that I really loved about this, especially the ending. He tied the ending together so beautifully, and it just left me breathless, but it kind of felt very dissonant with the rest of my feelings towards this book. I almost DNF'd this book multiple times, and I really think it was just because the writing style was really hard for me to get on with. There was like a lot of over-sexualization of children, which I know it's fiction, but again, it was really hard for me to read it and kind of get on board with it. But what is this book about? We're following this couple who rents kind of an Airbnb in the middle of nowhere, seemingly, this gorgeous, immaculate home in the countryside, and they are just enjoying their vacation, going to the beach, but there's some event that happens. We never really know what, but it's some catastrophe that has affected the whole world, and everyone's lives are on the cusp of changing, and the owners of these houses end up knocking on the door and being like, hey, we need to stay with you, something's going on. And it's the family's like perception of the couple that comes back, and the couple's perception of the family, and there's kind of this tension and this eeriness that's building. But really, in the end, it comes to being what connects us, how does fate affect who we end up caring about, and like what does it truly mean to be human. There is kind of this larger than life writing style. It's almost like this other being that kind of doesn't know like about our world, like looking down and telling the story of humans through these two families. It was super interesting and ambitious, but again, I just think it was the writing style that I couldn't fully get on board, and so that's why I ended up giving it probably like a 3.5 star. Man, did the ending pack a punch and was so beautiful and like almost brought me to tears, but like I said, I almost DNF'd it multiple times. So really, I don't know how I feel about this one, but I think that's okay. It's still a book that I'm glad that I pushed through and got to the end, and yeah, I'm definitely glad that I picked it for my book of the month, because I think it's one that I wouldn't have picked up otherwise, but it's probably one that I won't be keeping around on my shelves. Another book that I listened to on audio is The Sea People, or I guess it's just Sea People, The Puzzle of Polynesia by Christina Thompson. This was such a good nonfiction book. Christina Thompson has her doctorate in Pacific Islands. She's very knowledgeable, but she's also married to a man of Polynesian descent, and so her children are also part Polynesian, and so she has very personal interest but also just academic interest in these islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and I think she does such justice to the story of the people and this land, and I really enjoyed it. This is a topic that I knew very little about going into, so she kind of was opening my eyes. I was discovering these places along with her in this story. I really enjoyed kind of the way she chose to tell the story, which is kind of the first European contact with these islands and kind of the first European knowledge, but then also weaving in the stories and the myths of these islands, and just really trying to puzzle out how the people got to these islands and what it meant when the Europeans came to these islands, and how that affected the history of these islands. Nonfiction really transported me. I really appreciated just the narrative style of this, and I think that this would strike a lot of different people because there are so many different bits in this. There is the kind of travel parts of this, about the islands and their geography, and also about the people who inhabit these islands. Yeah, there's a lot in this. I really enjoyed it and definitely was glad that I picked this up. I know it's been a little bit of a booktube darling this year, and so yeah, it was a fun one to pick up and read this year as well. And then last but certainly not least, I finished Ask Again Yes by Mary Beth Keane. This is a family novel and I absolutely adored it. It's probably going to make it into one of the top books of 2020 for me. I loved the look at family and connection. I would kind of call it a quiet literary fiction story. I loved the writing style and kind of the vastness and how many years were covered. But we bounce around from the different characters and kind of have to piece things together ourselves. It was a really interesting look at mental health and the effects of very serious mental health on family dynamics. It also explores kind of the idea of family trauma and generational trauma and how everything that we do affects our family and can affect our children. So I thought that conversation was really good, but also just how continue and persevere loving the people that have been put in our lives. It's full of redemption and forgiveness and moving through really hard things. Yeah, this was just a totally stellar read for me. The opening are two young cops and kind of how being placed together on like their job training as partners kind of affects the rest of their life. So it kind of looks at fate and how simple moments can have huge impacts. I really loved this one. Very similar to like an Anne Patchett if you enjoy her writing. I would say it's also a similar writing style of like The Vanishing Half, or if you liked Little Fires Everywhere, kind of how we jump around from different characters and they all tie together. Yeah, this definitely just kind of ticked all of my boxes for me, and I'm really glad that I finished it. This book, I think, was the book I felt the most viscerally in a really long time. Like, I ached and was sad for these characters and what they were going through, but they also, in the end, paid off, and I got to have a lot of hope with these characters. So that was it for October, and I actually finished Ask Again Yes in November, but let's hop on over to the few November reads that I was able to finish. The first one being Hollowpox, The Hunt for Morrigan Crow, which is the third book that was just released in the Nevermore series. I absolutely adored this. This world is so whimsical and magical and fun, but the characters are just so heartfelt and real. I really appreciate how a lot of the young characters deal with problems. There's a lot of seeking out adults, trusted adults, and I think that that's a lot of times lacking in middle grade or YA fiction. It's just like, screw the adults, we will do it ourselves. So I appreciate the collaboration and the trust among children and adults. I think that's such good representation in books for young children, that it's okay to like seek help from your caregivers. I really appreciate that message. But yeah, this one is kind of surrounding a pandemic, which I don't know if Jessica Townsend was planning on doing that or if it kind of changed due to the coronavirus. I have no idea, but it was an interesting topic to be exploring in middle grade fiction for sure. The mass spread of disease that is going on in Hollowpox is very different from what we're dealing in, but definitely some similar themes. So I thought that it was interesting that that was chosen to go into the book, and I would love to know a little bit more about that. I'm sure she's talked about it, just, you know, being in 2020. But yes, loved it. Can't wait for the fourth one. It's been a long time since I've been like giddy about series releases, so it's really fun to have the next one to look forward to, and it'll probably be a year or so, which I'm very sad about. I might have to do some rereading because I'm just loving these books so much. And then I also finished on audiobook Anne's House of Dreams, which is the fifth book in the Anne of Green Gables series, and this was a joy as always. I definitely must say that I didn't enjoy it as much as I have some of the other ones, but I must say as Anne gets older, I think some of the whimsy and some of the childhood kind of precociousness and the childhood imagination fades. And I think that's such a true experience as we age. Even if we continue to be imaginative and playful, it's not the same as when we were children. And so I definitely think that's softening, and as she gets older and it continues to experience hard adult things, that does continue to kind of soften her a bit. But she's still spunky and makes such beautiful connections with the people around her. There's some really fun characters in this novel, in particular an old sea captain who runs the lighthouse, or runs the light in the lighthouse, named Captain Jim. He was such a fun character. There's another character in this, and I can't quite remember her name. I think it's like Cordelia, maybe Cornelia, something along that manner. And she's such a fun character. I really enjoyed her, but I will say huge chunks of time are spent just with her kind of talking about the neighborhood and the other neighbors and all of the people in this community, and you don't really have connections to these people, so it kind of feels a little bit like throwaway at time. It's like, I get it, she's easy to kind of go off on a little tangent, but it didn't always feel to me to be serving the story. So that's okay. It was definitely a solid 3.5 star book. I love to be with Anne. I love to spend time with her and her family and her friends. She's always a joy, but yeah, just definitely not quite as high as some of the other books have been for me. I mean, considering Anne of Green Gables was my favorite book in 2019. Okay, and I am in the middle of a few books. The first being a nonfiction, 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You by Toni Rinke. This is a nonfiction book about what it says on the title, how our phones are changing us, and really kind of looking at it from a Christian perspective. How do we be the masters of our phone and use technology for good, and for good for ourselves spiritually and mentally, but also good for other people. And I'm really enjoying this one. It's told in nice short little chapters that center around a theme, but there's lots of stuff to digest after you read that chapter. So definitely enjoying this one, and would recommend if you're looking for a book that talks about technology from a Christian perspective. I'm also reading Beartown by Frederick Bachman. This is a much beloved story about this town called Beartown and their love of hockey, but it's really so much more than that, and looking at the different characters and the things that kind of drive them in their life. I know that there's some heavy themes in this book. I haven't quite got there yet, and I'm about a third of the way through, so we'll see how I continue to go with this. Right now, I'm enjoying it. It's okay. That's kind of how I tend to be with Frederick Bachman's books, but I also know he kind of can pack a big punch, and he's not done weaving the story, so I need to give him his chance. So reading Beartown. I'm also listening to The Searcher by Tana French, and I am loving it. I'm so upset that I waited so long to read a Tana French. This book is been amazing so far. It's set in Ireland, and we're following our retired detective cop Cal, and he's moved away kind of to escape his job and his marriage, and just gone away to Ireland to fix up this house, but he kind of ends up getting wrapped up in a case again anyway. And yes, it's so evocative, like the setting and her writing about the people. Definitely like a slower mystery. It's not super fast-paced, in-your-face, punchy kind of mystery or thriller, so it's definitely my cup of tea. I'm really enjoying that, and I cannot wait to read more Tana French. I think I'm going to love her, and I'm so sad that I was like, oh, Tana French, because I love it. I'm loving it so much. All right, that is everything that I read in October and November, and I'm finishing up and hopefully gonna get done very soon in December. I'd love to know what you've been reading. Thoughts, opinions on any of these books? Do you agree? Do you not? I love to have a dialogue about all of that stuff down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you're having a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.